Colorado Territory, 1868. The aspiring town of Silver Creek clung to the edge of the frontier like a stubborn burr on a saddle blanket. The spring rains had finally ceased, leaving behind lush forests and rushing streams beneath the shadow of the Rockies. It was in these wild lands that Ryder Gallagher believed he'd found his purpose, far from the disappointments of civilization, where a man was judged by the sweat on his brow and the steadiness of his hand, not the circumstances of his birth. At 25, Ryder had already lived enough to know one truth: the frontier was no place for tenderness. Love was a luxury afforded to townsfolk and city dwellers, not men who faced nature's harsh judgment daily. The empty bunkhouse at the Lazy S Ranch was testament enough to that reality. Men came and went like tumbleweeds, drifting wherever the wind of opportunity blew them. Attachments only led to disappointment when the inevitable goodbye came. This morning, as the sun crested the eastern hills, Ryder sat atop his buckskin gelding, scanning the valley below. He pulled his hat lower against the glare, his clean-shaven jaw set with determination. Beneath a worn leather vest and cotton shirt, his lean frame betrayed the strength built from years of breaking horses and driving cattle. His eyes, green as alpine meadows and just as unyielding, rarely missed anything in his domain. "Looks like we got strays in the north pasture again, Whiskey," he said to his horse, whose ears flicked back at the sound of his voice. "Reckon we best bring them home." The Lazy S wasn't his, not legally, but Foreman Caldwell had all but handed him the reins of daily operations, trusting Ryder's instincts and work ethic above the other hands. It was responsibility he craved, proof he was worthy of something, even if that something was just cattle and horses rather than human connection. As Ryder urged Whiskey down the slope, the morning dew soaking the tall grass around them, he spotted movement in the tree line. He reined in sharply, hand drifting to the Colt strapped to his hip. Indian raids had decreased since the war ended, but bandits still plagued the territory, and a lone rider made for easy pickings. But it wasn't a bandit who emerged from the pines, it was a woman. She stumbled more than walked, her cream-colored dress torn and mudded, her long blonde hair falling in tangled waves around a face too pale for someone who'd been outdoors. Even from this distance, Ryder could see she was young, not much more than 20 if that, and plainly in distress. His first instinct was to turn away. Complications wore women's faces out here, and he'd long ago decided that avoiding entanglements was the surest way to survive. But something in her desperate, uneven gait wouldn't allow him to ride on. "Damn it all," he muttered, turning Whiskey toward the stranger. As he approached, she froze like a startled deer, swaying slightly. Up close he could see the fine quality of her dress despite its current state, the delicate features beneath the dirt and scratches, and eyes the color of summer cornflowers, now wide with fear. "Ma'am," he called, stopping a respectful distance away and removing his hat, "you appear to be in some trouble." She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, tears welling. Then, without warning, her knees buckled. Ryder was off his horse in an instant, catching her before she hit the ground. Miss," her skin burned with fever beneath his touch. As he held her limp form, he noticed a small gold locket around her neck, engraved with the initials ZR. Whoever she was, whatever had happened to her, Ryder knew his quiet, uncomplicated existence had just ended. As surely as the morning sun now climbed the Colorado sky, this woman was about to change everything. Her name, he would later learn, was Zara Remington, and she was running from something far worse than any frontier danger he'd ever faced. Zara had been unconscious for nearly 2 days by the time her fever broke. Mrs. Olson, the widow who kept house at the ranch, had taken charge of the girl's care, shooing away curious cowboys and changing the cool compresses on her forehead with maternal efficiency. Ryder had kept his distance, focusing on ranch work while trying to ignore the questions that plagued him. Who was she? What had driven a clearly well-bred young woman into the wilderness alone? The local sheriff had no reports of missing persons matching her description, and the nearest town was nearly 30 miles away. When Mrs. Olson sent word that the girl was awake and asking for her rescuer, Ryder found himself unexpectedly nervous. He removed his hat and dusted off his clothes before entering the small bedroom at the back of the main house. The young woman sat propped against pillows, her golden hair neatly braided, wearing one of Mrs. Olson's nightgowns that hung loose on her slender frame. Without the mud and exhaustion, she was even more striking, not in the painted, showy way of saloon girls, but with a natural elegance that seemed out of place in these rough surroundings. "Mr. Gallagher," she said, her voice soft but clearer than he expected, "I understand I have you to thank for my rescue." Anyone would have done the same, Miss Remington, he replied, awkward in the small room that smelled of lavender water and clean linen. She smiled faintly. Few would have, sir, especially for a stranger. I am 22 years old and have seen enough of the world to know kindness is rarer than gold. 22, just as he'd guessed. Ryder shifted uncomfortably, unsure what to do with his hands. You know my name, and I know yours from the locket. Seems we're not quite strangers anymore. Her hand flew to her throat where the locket still rested. You didn't open it. No, ma'am, wasn't my business. Something like relief crossed her features. Thank you for everything, she hesitated. I suppose you're wondering what I was doing out there alone. Crossed my mind. Zara looked down at her hands, which were still showing signs of her ordeal, scratches and blisters on what had clearly once been smooth, cared-for skin. I was traveling with a party from Denver to San Francisco, she began. My father arranged for me to stay with my aunt after, she faltered, after some unfortunate circumstances in Boston. Our coach was attacked 3 days ago by bandits. I managed to escape into the woods during the commotion, but became hopelessly lost. Ryder frowned. Coach robbery should have been reported. Sheriff Jenkins hasn't heard anything. A shadow passed over her face. Perhaps they thought everyone perished or was captured. I heard gunshots after I fled. Which route were you taking? The northern pass, I believe. Ryder's frown deepened. That was nearly 50 miles from where he'd found her. Either she'd wandered much farther than seemed possible for a city woman, or she wasn't telling the whole truth. That's mighty far to have traveled on foot, Miss Remington. Her blue eyes met his directly. Fear is a powerful motivator, Mr. Gallagher. Something in her steady gaze made him inclined to believe her, despite the improbability. Or perhaps he simply wanted to believe her. Well, he said finally, you're welcome to stay until you're fully recovered. I can send word to your aunt in San Francisco, let her know you're safe. A flash of panic crossed her features. No, I mean that won't be necessary. I wouldn't want to alarm her prematurely. Once I'm well enough to travel, I can continue my journey. More secrets then, Ryder nodded slowly. As you wish, but the Lazy S is a working ranch, not a hotel. Everyone earns their keep here. To his surprise, she straightened her shoulders. I'm not afraid of work, Mr. Gallagher. I may have been raised in Boston society, but I'm capable of learning. For the first time since finding her, Ryder smiled. We'll see about that, Miss Remington. We surely will. What neither of them knew then was how those words would echo through the coming weeks. As spring blossomed into summer, and Zara Remington proved herself far more resilient than anyone expected, especially Ryder Gallagher, who had sworn never to let another person pass the walls he'd built around his heart. By early June, Zara had become an unexpected fixture at the Lazy S. Her recovery had been swift once the fever broke, and true to her word, she insisted on making herself useful. Mrs. Olson initially tried to keep her to ladylike tasks, mending, cooking, light cleaning, but Zara had other ideas. I want to learn to ride, she announced one morning at breakfast, causing several cowboys to choke on their coffee. Ryder, who had been trying his best to maintain a polite distance despite finding his thoughts drifting to her more often than he cared to admit, looked up from his plate. A side saddle might be hard to come by out here. Zara, wearing a simple blue dress she'd sewn herself from fabric purchased in town, lifted her chin. Who said anything about a side saddle? And that was how, against his better judgment, Ryder found himself in the corral that afternoon, watching as Zara gathered her skirts and mounted a gentle mare named Daisy in the proper Western style. My father would have apoplexy if he could see me now, she laughed, adjusting her seat with surprising confidence. You've ridden before, Ryder observed, leaning against the fence. In the proper Boston fashion, yes. But this, she straightened her back, experimenting with the different balance, this makes much more sense. The June sunshine caught in her hair, turning it to spun gold beneath a borrowed hat. The week's outdoors had brought a healthy glow to her skin and a sparkle to her eyes that made something twist in Ryder's chest. Why did you really come west, Miss Remington? He asked suddenly, the question escaping before he could think better of it. Her smile faltered slightly. I told you, family circumstances. Most Boston ladies don't flee to their aunts with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a gold locket. She was quiet for a long moment, adjusting the reins in her gloved hands. No, I suppose they don't. Then, with surprising skill, she nudged Daisy into a trot and circled the corral, effectively ending the conversation. That night, unable to sleep, Ryder sat on the bunkhouse porch, watching the stars and smoking a cigarette. The sound of the screen door opening behind him made him turn. Zara stood there in a simple nightgown and shawl, her hair loose around her shoulders. "I couldn't sleep," she said by way of explanation. "I saw the light of your cigarette." Ryder quickly stubbed it out. "Apologies, didn't mean to disturb you." "You didn't." She sat beside him on the step, keeping a proper distance. "It's peaceful out here at night. In Boston, there's always noise. Carriages, people, even the gaslights seem to hum." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the night sounds of crickets and distant coyotes filling the air around them. "I was engaged," she said finally, her voice so low he almost missed it, "to a man my father chose, a business arrangement more than a marriage. Richard Blackwell was his name, from one of Boston's oldest families with the right connections and the right bank accounts." Ryder said nothing, afraid any response might stem the sudden flow of truth. She paused, searching for words. "He was not a kind man, but he hid it well, especially from my father. After my mother died, father was so determined to see me settled properly that he refused to see what was right before his eyes." "What happened?" Ryder asked quietly. Zara's hand went to her locket, a gesture he'd noticed she made when nervous. "I discovered certain things about Richard that made marriage to him unthinkable. When I tried to break the engagement, he threatened to ruin my father financially. He had the means to do it, too." She took a shaky breath. "So I ran. I left a letter for my father explaining everything and took the train west. I had planned to disappear somewhere no one would think to look for a Boston debutante. San Francisco isn't exactly hiding." A sad smile touched her lips. "I don't have an aunt in San Francisco, Mr. Gallagher. I don't have anywhere. The coach robbery was real enough, but I was traveling alone." The admission hung in the air between them, weighted with vulnerability and trust. "You can call me Ryder," he said finally. "Seems we're past formalities." She looked at him then, her face silvered by moonlight. "Thank you, Ryder, for not asking more than I can tell right now." He nodded, understanding there were deeper waters here than she was ready to navigate. "We all have pasts we'd rather leave behind. That's why most folks come west." "And what are you leaving behind?" she asked softly. The question caught him off guard. No one at the Lazy S had ever asked about his past, respecting the unspoken code of the frontier that a man was judged by his present actions, not his history. "A father who decided I wasn't worth claiming," he said finally. "A mother who died working herself to death in a Chicago factory trying to support us, and a name that isn't Gallagher." He hadn't meant to reveal even that much, but something about the night and her honesty had loosened his tongue. "Is that why you avoid connections, because you're afraid of being abandoned again?" Her insight was unnervingly accurate. Ryder stood abruptly. "It's late. You should get some rest if you're planning to ride again tomorrow." Zara rose as well, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "I've offended you, I'm sorry." "No," he said, gentler now, "you haven't. You've just reminded me that some walls serve a purpose." She studied him for a moment, then reached out and briefly touched his arm, the lightest pressure gone almost before he registered it. "Good night, Ryder." As he watched her walk back to the main house, Ryder felt something inside him shifting, like ground during a tremor. Dangerous, he thought. This feeling was dangerous. And yet, for the first time in years, he wasn't sure he wanted to run from it. July brought scorching heat and the cattle drive to market in Denver. Zara had proven herself surprisingly capable around the ranch, and though Mrs. Olson protested, she insisted on joining the drive as a cook's helper. "I'll not be left behind like some delicate flower," she declared, and something in her determination silenced even Foreman Caldwell's objections. For 10 days they moved across the Colorado landscape, the dust and heat tempering even the hardiest cowboy's spirits. Zara worked from dawn until well after dusk, helping Cookie prepare meals, mending torn clothing, and even taking a turn at night watch when one of the younger hands fell ill with heatstroke. Ryder found himself watching her more often than he should, the way she adapted to each new challenge, her gentle handling of both animals and men, the quiet strength that seemed at odds with her refined upbringing. He wasn't the only one. Several of the cowboys had taken to finding excuses to linger near the chuck wagon, though a stern look from Ryder usually sent them back to their duties. On the 7th night, as they camped near a small stream, Ryder found Zara sitting alone by the water's edge, away from the main camp. The moonlight caught on her hair, now braided simply down her back, and on the open locket in her palm. "Homesick?" he asked, approaching slowly to avoid startling her. She closed the locket quickly. "No, just thinking." He sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. "May I?" He nodded toward the locket. After a moment's hesitation, she handed it to him. Inside was a small, faded photograph of a handsome young man in a Union Army uniform. "My brother Zachary," she said quietly. "He died at Gettysburg." Ryder studied the face, the same clear eyes as Zara, the same determined set to the jaw. "You were close." "He was everything to me, my protector, my confidant. After he died, there was no one left to," she trailed off. "To shield you from men like Blackwell," Ryder finished. She nodded, taking back the locket. "He would have seen through Richard immediately. Instead, I had to learn the hard way what kind of man I was promised to." "What did he do to you?" The question was gentle but direct. Zara stared at the rippling water. "It wasn't what he did to me, it was what I discovered he had done to others, young women servants, shop girls who couldn't fight back, and when I confronted him," she shuddered, "he showed me exactly what I could expect as his wife. Said he would break me of my excessive conscience." Anger flared hot in Ryder's chest, "And your father wouldn't listen." Richard had already positioned himself as father's financial savior after some bad investments. Breaking the engagement would have meant ruin. She looked up at Ryder, moonlight reflecting the unshed tears in her eyes. "I couldn't stay and become that man's property, but I couldn't destroy my father either. So I disappeared." Without thinking, Ryder reached out and took her hand. Her fingers were calloused now, no longer the soft hands of a society lady, but they fit perfectly against his palm. "You're safe here," he said simply. She smiled sadly. "For now. But I have no illusions about my situation, Ryder. I'm a woman alone in a world that has little use for such creatures. Eventually, I'll have to find a more permanent solution." The words struck him like a physical blow, the reminder that her presence at the Lazy S was temporary, that she would eventually move on to whatever future she could carve for herself. The thought of the ranch without her quick smile and determined spirit left him feeling hollow. "It doesn't have to be that way," he said, the words surprising even him. "The West is changing. Women are homesteading on their own, running businesses." "Is that what you see for me, homesteading alone?" There was something in her voice he couldn't quite decipher. Before he could answer, a call came from the camp cookie, bellowing that the coffee was ready. The moment broken, they walked back side by side, not touching but close enough that Ryder could feel the warmth of her presence even in the cool evening air. Something had shifted between them, some barrier lowered, and for the first time in years, Ryder found himself wondering if his belief in solitude had been wrong all along. The cattle sold well in Denver, bringing a better price than anyone had dared hope. Foreman Caldwell, flush with success, gave the men 2 days in town before the return journey, time to bathe, drink, and enjoy civilized comforts before heading back to the isolation of the ranch. For Zara, it meant something more urgent, shopping for proper clothing to replace the makeshift garments she'd been wearing. Mrs. Olson had insisted she take part of her cook's wages for the purpose, overriding Zara's protests. "A young lady needs proper attire," the older woman had declared. "You've been making do with altered hand-me-downs long enough." So it was that Zara found herself in Denver's finest dressmaker's shop, being fitted for 2 everyday dresses and one suitable for social occasions, as Mrs. Olson had instructed. Standing before the mirror in a gown of deep blue that matched her eyes, Zara hardly recognized herself. 3 months on the ranch had transformed her, her skin sun-kissed, her figure stronger, her posture confident in a way Boston's finest finishing school had never managed to instill. "You'll be turning heads at the harvest dance," the dressmaker said, adjusting the fit at the waist. "Dance. Silver Creek holds one every September to celebrate the harvest. Folks come from all the surrounding ranches. Surely they have them where you're from." Zara thought of Boston's formal balls, the rigid protocols, the calculated social maneuvering. "Not quite like that, I imagine." As she left the shop with her packages, Zara's mind filled with unexpected images, herself in the blue dress, Ryder in proper attire rather than work clothes, his hand at her waist as they danced beneath harvest decorations. The fantasy was so engaging that she nearly collided with a man on the boardwalk. "Excuse me," she began, then froze as she looked up into a familiar face. Zara Remington," the man's eyes widened with recognition. "Good Lord, it is you." Her heart pounded painfully against her ribs. "Thomas Wright, what on earth are you doing in Denver?" Thomas, a friend of her brother's from their Harvard days, looked as shocked as she felt. "I could ask you the same. Your father has had investigators searching for you for months. Everyone thought you were dead or worse." Zara glanced around nervously, suddenly feeling exposed in the busy street. Please lower your voice, Thomas. He took her arm, guiding her to a quieter spot near the hardware store. What happened? Your letter was so vague, just that you couldn't marry Richard and needed to disappear for a while. Blackwell has been telling everyone you had some kind of nervous breakdown. Of course he has, she muttered. It's better than the truth. Thomas studied her with concern. You look different. Are you in some kind of trouble? No. For the first time in years, I'm actually free of trouble. She straightened her shoulders. Please don't tell anyone you've seen me, Thomas, especially not Richard. His frown deepened. I'm not sure I can make that promise, Zara. Your father has been beside himself with worry. And after what happened? What? A cold dread washed over her. What happened? Thomas lowered his voice. Your father had a stroke, Zara, 2 months ago. He's recovering, but it's been touch and go. The packages nearly slipped from her suddenly numb fingers. Father is ill because of me. The doctors say it was overwork and stress. Thomas's expression softened. He needs you, Zara. Whatever your disagreement with Richard, surely your father's health matters more. Shame and guilt crashed over her in waves. How could she have been riding horses and learning to cook over campfires while her father lay ill, possibly dying? What kind of daughter had she become? I need to go to him, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm returning to Boston next week. Come with me. Thomas squeezed her arm encouragingly. Whatever happened between you and Richard can be resolved. He still speaks of you with great affection. The very thought made her stomach turn, but her father's condition overrode all other considerations. I need time to think, Thomas, to make arrangements. Of course, he pulled out a calling card. I'm staying at the Grand Hotel. Send word when you've decided. As he walked away, Zara stood frozen on the boardwalk, her carefully constructed new life crumbling around her. She had run to save herself, but at what cost to those she loved? And what of her growing feelings for Ryder, feelings she had only just begun to acknowledge to herself? The weight of decision pressed down on her like a physical burden as she made her way back to the hotel where the ranch hands were staying. Her father needed her. Duty called her home. But as she climbed the stairs to her small room, another truth became painfully clear. Somewhere along the dusty trail from Boston to Colorado, her heart had found a home when she wasn't sure she had the strength to leave. Ryder knew something was wrong the moment they started the journey back to the ranch. Zara, usually quick with a smile and eager to share observations about the passing landscape, rode in silence, her face drawn and distant. When he tried to engage her in conversation, her responses were polite but brief, lacking the warmth he'd grown accustomed to. By the second day, his concern had deepened to worry. That evening, as they made camp for the night, he found her sitting alone again, staring into the fire with unseeing eyes. All right, he said, settling beside her. What happened in Denver? She startled slightly, as if pulled from deep thought. What makes you think something happened? You haven't been yourself since we left. Did someone recognize you? Is Blackwell here? The thought made his hand drift instinctively toward his gun. No, nothing like that, she sighed, twisting the locket chain between her fingers. I ran into an old friend of my brother's. He told me my father has had a stroke. Understanding dawned immediately. And you feel responsible. Wouldn't you? I disappeared without a proper explanation, leaving only a letter that probably raised more questions than it answered. He's been searching for me, worried sick. And now he's ill, perhaps dying while I've been, she gestured helplessly at the camp around them. While you've been surviving, Ryder finished firmly. There's no shame in that, Zara. Isn't there? I've always been taught that family comes before all else, that a daughter's duty is to care for her father, especially when there's no mother or wife to do so. Tears glimmered in her eyes, catching the firelight. I've been selfish. You've been brave, Ryder countered, moving closer. You escaped a man who would have destroyed you. That's not selfishness, that's self-preservation. She looked at him then, really looked at him, her blue eyes searching his face. My friend is returning to Boston next week. He wants me to go with him. The words hit Ryder like a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. Of course she would go. How could she not? Yet the thought of her leaving, returning to the very danger she had fled, to a life that had nearly crushed her spirit, was almost unbearable. And what do you want? He asked, his voice rougher than he intended. I want, she faltered, then straightened her shoulders. I need to see my father. I need to explain to him face to face why I left. He deserves that much. And Blackwell, what happens when he learns you've returned? Her expression hardened. I'm not the same frightened girl who ran away, Ryder. These months have changed me. I've learned I'm stronger than I ever knew. Pride mingled with his fear for her. She was right. The woman sitting beside him now bore little resemblance to the lost, feverish girl he'd found in the woods. She had a steel core that the frontier had merely revealed, not created. "When will you leave?" he asked, already dreading the answer. "I'm not certain yet. Thomas, my friend, is at the Grand Hotel." I told him I needed time to decide. Ryder nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. A man shouldn't die without the chance to reconcile with his child." She reached out then and took his hand, her fingers warm against his. "Thank you for understanding. It means more than I can say." They sat in silence after that, hands joined, watching the fire burn down to embers. Neither spoke of what this parting would mean for them, of the unspoken feelings that had grown between them over the summer months. Some truths were too fragile to voice, especially in the face of inevitable separation. Later, lying in his bedroll and staring at the star-filled sky, Ryder confronted the irony of his situation. He had spent years building walls to protect himself from attachment, convinced that connections only led to pain. Now, facing the loss of someone he had known for mere months, he realized his strategy had failed completely. The pain was coming regardless, and all his careful distance had done nothing to prepare him for it. What he didn't know, couldn't have known, was that Zara lay awake too, tears silently tracking down her temples as she wrestled with the most difficult decision of her life: duty to her past or hope for her future. The lazy S felt empty without Zara, though she had only been gone 3 days. Ryder threw himself into work, rising before dawn and collapsing, exhausted, into bed long after sunset. If the other hands noticed his grim mood, they were wise enough not to mention it. It had been a quiet parting. He'd driven her to Silver Creek in the ranch wagon to meet the eastbound stage, neither of them finding adequate words for the occasion. At the last moment, as the stage driver called for passengers, she had pressed something into his hand, her locket. "Keep it safe for me," she'd said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Until I return." The implication had nearly undone him. "You're coming back." "I have to believe I will, once my father is stable, once I've made him understand." She'd touched his face briefly. "I've found something here I never expected, Ryder, something I'm not ready to lose." Then she was gone, the stage carrying her away in a cloud of dust, leaving him standing in the street with her most precious possession in his palm and a promise he wasn't sure she could keep. Now, a week later, he sat on the bunkhouse porch, turning the locket over in his fingers. Inside was still the photograph of her brother, a ghost from another life. Had she really meant to return, or was the locket merely a kinder way of saying goodbye? "Wearing women's jewelry now, Gallagher," the mocking voice cut through his thoughts. Ryder looked up to see Silas Jenkins, the sheriff's youngest deputy, leaning against the porch rail with a smirk. The man had never bothered to hide his interest in Zara during her time at the ranch, nor his resentment when she clearly preferred Ryder's company. "State your business, Jenkins," Ryder said coldly, pocketing the locket. "Got a telegram for Foreman Caldwell." He held up the yellow paper. "Thought I'd deliver it personally, see how things are going without your little Boston flower around." Ryder stood slowly. "I'll take that to Caldwell." Jenkins held the telegram out of reach. "Seems a shame she up and left so sudden. Pretty thing like that could have found a good place here, especially with the harvest dance coming up." "The telegram, Jenkins." The deputy's smirk widened. "Course, rumor has it she wasn't running from much back east, just looking for a bit of frontier adventure before settling down with her rich fiancé. Taming a cowboy might have been part of the game." Something in Ryder snapped. Before he could think better of it, he had Jenkins by the collar, the man's boots barely touching the porch floor. "You know nothing about her," Ryder growled. "Nothing." Fear flashed in Jenkins's eyes. "Easy now. Just repeating what I heard in town. Lady at the dress shop said she ran into an old friend in Denver, talked about going back to her intended. Seemed mighty cozy from what folks saw." Ryder released him so abruptly that Jenkins stumbled. "Get off this property." "After I deliver this to Caldwell," Jenkins insisted, straightening his rumpled shirt. "It's marked urgent." Ryder snatched the telegram from his hand and strode toward the main house, not trusting himself to remain civil any longer. Jenkins's words echoed painfully in his mind. Had he misunderstood everything? Was Thomas right more than just her brother's friend? Had her talk of returning been merely a kind fiction? No, he refused to believe it. Whatever else might be uncertain, Zara's integrity was not. She wouldn't have spoken of returning if she hadn't meant it. She wouldn't have left her brother's locket if she hadn't intended to reclaim it. And yet, as the days stretched into weeks with no word from Boston, doubt crept in like autumn frost, gradual, insidious, and chilling to the bone. Boston greeted Zara with cold rain and colder memories. As the carriage wound through familiar streets toward the Remington home on Beacon Hill, she felt as if she were moving backward in time, returning to a life that no longer fit, like a dress she had outgrown. The house looked exactly as she had left it, imposing, elegant, and utterly devoid of warmth. Only the black crepe on the door hinted at the illness within. Thomas, who had accompanied her from the station, squeezed her gloved hand. "It will be all right, Zara. Your father will be overjoyed to see you." She wasn't so certain. Franklin Remington had never been a demonstrative man even in the best of times. His love came wrapped in expectations and propriety, not embraces and forgiveness. The butler's eyes widened at the sight of her. "Miss Remington, we had no word of your return." "Hello, Edwards. How is my father?" "Improved, miss, though still confined to his room. The doctor visits daily." "I'll see him immediately," she said, removing her traveling coat with hands that trembled slightly. "Of course, though I should warn you, Mr. Blackwell is with him now." A chill ran through her that had nothing to do with the rain. "I see." Thomas stepped forward. "Perhaps I should accompany you, Zara." She shook her head. "No. This is something I must do alone." As she climbed the familiar staircase, Zara felt the weight of the past bearing down upon her. Each step seemed to strip away a piece of the independence she had gained in Colorado, replacing it with the constrained existence she had fled. Outside her father's bedroom, she paused to gather her courage. Then, squaring her shoulders in a gesture that would have made Ryder proud, she knocked firmly and entered without waiting for a response. The scene that greeted her was exactly as she had feared. Her father propped against pillows, looking pale and diminished, with Richard Blackwell seated beside the bed like a spider beside its prey. Both men turned at her entrance, wearing matching expressions of shock. "Zara," her father's voice was weaker than she remembered, but the authority remained. "Is it really you?" "Hello, father." She moved to his side, taking his frail hand in hers and deliberately ignoring Blackwell. "I came as soon as I heard you were ill." Franklin Remington's stern features softened momentarily. "My girl, we thought you were lost to us." "I was never lost, father. I simply needed to find myself." Blackwell stood, his handsome face arranged in an expression of concern that didn't reach his cold eyes. "What a miraculous homecoming." "We've been beside ourselves with worry, my dear." The endearment made her skin crawl. "I'm sure you have, Richard." "Where have you been?" her father demanded, some of his old vigor returning. "Your letter was most disturbing and vague." "Richard has had detectives searching for months." Before she could answer, Blackwell intervened smoothly. "Perhaps this conversation should wait, Franklin. You're still recovering, and Zara must be exhausted from her journey. There will be time for explanations." The calculation in his gaze was unmistakable. He didn't want her story told, at least not before he could control the narrative. "Richard is right," she said, surprising both men. "You need rest, father. I promise we will talk tomorrow when you're stronger. I want to tell you everything." Her father's grip on her hand tightened. "You'll not disappear again." "No, father, I'm here now." Relief washed over his features, and for a moment, Zara glimpsed the vulnerable man beneath the stern patriarch, a man who had genuinely feared for his only remaining child. As she left the room, Blackwell followed close behind. In the hallway, he seized her arm with enough force to bruise. "Whatever game you're playing, it ends now," he hissed. "Your father's condition is precarious. One shock could kill him." Zara met his gaze steadily. "Remove your hand, Richard, or I will scream loudly enough to wake every servant in this house." Surprise flickered across his face before he released her. "You've changed." "More than you can imagine." She stepped back, maintaining a safe distance. "I have no intention of upsetting my father unnecessarily, but make no mistake, I will never marry you. Not if you were the last man in Boston." His expression hardened. "You seem to forget your father's financial situation. Without my support, the Remington name will be ruined." "Is that what you want?" "What I want," she said carefully, "is for my father to recover. After that, we will deal with other matters." "How practical you've become," he observed coldly. "I wonder what sort of life you've been living to harden you so." "A better one than I would have had with you. With that parting shot, she turned and walked down the hallway to her old bedroom, her back straight despite the trembling that had started deep within her. Only when the door closed behind her did Zara allow herself to sink onto the edge of her bed, her composure crumbling. The familiar room with its delicate furniture and floral wallpaper felt like a stranger's dwelling now. She longed for the simplicity of the ranch, the honest work, the open spaces, and most of all, the quiet strength of the man who had rescued her in more ways than one. Her hand went to her throat, seeking the comfort of her locket before remembering she had left it with Ryder. The emptiness there matched the one growing in her heart. She had made the right choice in coming to her father, but how long would duty keep her here? And would Ryder still be waiting when, if she could return? The harvest dance arrived with autumn's first chill, transforming Silver Creek's modest town hall into a celebration of the season's bounty. Bunting and corn husks decorated the walls, while tables groaned under the weight of home-cooked food. A small band played in the corner, coaxing even the most reluctant cowboys onto the dance floor with their lively tunes. Ryder stood at the edge of the festivities, nursing a glass of punch he wished contained something stronger. He hadn't wanted to attend, but Foreman Caldwell had insisted the entire Lazy S crew make an appearance. Good for relations with the neighboring ranches, he'd said, though Ryder suspected it had more to do with Mrs. Olson's determination to see him stop moping around like a lovesick calf. His dark mood hadn't improved upon arrival. Every corner of the room seemed to hold a memory of Zara, conversations about this very dance, her excitement at the prospect of a proper social gathering, the blue dress she had bought in Denver specifically for the occasion. The dress she would never wear, at least not here. "You're scaring off the ladies with that thundercloud expression, Gallagher," said Jake Winters, one of the senior hands, clapping him on the shoulder. "Lighten up. Plenty of pretty girls hoping for a dance with the Lazy S's finest." Ryder forced a smile that felt more like a grimace, just taking in the atmosphere. "Well, take it in while moving your feet. Sheriff's daughter's been eyeing you all night." The thought held no appeal, maybe later. Jake shook his head in exasperation and moved on, leaving Ryder to his brooding. 2 months had passed since Zara's departure, 2 months without a single letter or telegram. He told himself there could be many explanations: her father's condition requiring her full attention, difficulty in sending correspondence to a ranch hand, uncertainty about how her words might be received. But as weeks turned to months, even his most generous rationalizations had begun to wear thin. The band struck up a waltz and couples filled the floor. Ryder turned to leave. He had made an appearance as required, but couldn't stomach watching others' happiness when his own felt so remote. He had just reached the door when a commotion near the entrance caught his attention. People were turning, murmuring, stepping aside to create a path for someone just arriving. Ryder's heart stumbled in its rhythm before he could temper his reaction with reason. It wouldn't be her, it couldn't be her, but it was. Zara stood in the doorway, snowflakes melting in her golden hair and on the shoulders of her blue dress, the very dress she had described to him that night by the fire. She scanned the room anxiously, her gaze passing over him once before returning with recognition that lit her features like sunrise. The crowd between them might as well have disappeared. Ryder moved forward as if pulled by an invisible force, stopping only when they stood face to face, close enough to see the rapid rise and fall of her breath and the uncertainty in her eyes. "You came back," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I promised I would." Her smile was tentative, as if she wasn't sure of her welcome. "I hope I'm not too late for a dance." Instead of answering, he reached into his pocket and withdrew the locket. With gentle hands, he fastened it around her neck, letting his fingers linger against her skin. "Perfect timing," he said softly, then, offering his arm, "May I have this dance, Miss Remington?" Her answering smile was radiant. "I thought you'd never ask, Mr. Gallagher." As he led her onto the dance floor, the whispers and stares faded into insignificance. The only reality that mattered was the woman in his arms, returned against all odds and expectations. "Your father," he asked as they began to move with the music, "recovering well, stubborn as ever, but," she hesitated, "understanding in the end more than I expected." "In Blackwell." A shadow crossed her face. "That's a longer story. One I'd prefer to save for after the dance." Ryder nodded, content for now to simply hold her, to breathe in the faint lavender scent of her hair and feel the warmth of her hand in his. Questions could wait, explanations could wait. For this moment it was enough that she had returned, not as the lost girl he had found in the woods, but as a woman who had faced her past and chosen her future. As the waltz ended, he didn't release her hand. Instead, he led her through the crowd and out onto the town hall's small porch, where the night air was crisp and snowflakes danced in the light spilling from the windows. I wasn't sure you'd still be here, Zara admitted, her breath forming small clouds between them. Or if you'd want to see me after so much time without word. I considered leaving, he said honestly, more than once, but something kept me here. He touched the locket at her throat, a promise, a hope. She covered his hand with hers. When I reached Boston, everything was worse than I feared. Father was very ill, and Richard, she took a steadying breath. Richard had positioned himself as indispensable. He controlled access to my father, managed his business affairs, even had the servants reporting my movements. Anger flared in Ryder's chest. He kept you prisoner. He tried, but as I told you before, I'm not the same woman who fled Boston. Her eyes flashed with remembered determination. I bided my time, caring for father, rebuilding his strength and his trust in me. When he was well enough, I told him everything. About Richard's true nature, about the threats, about what I had discovered in Colorado. Which was? Her gaze softened, that I'm stronger than I knew, that I could build a life on my own terms. And that I had found a man whose quiet integrity made Richard Blackwell look like the hollow pretender he is. Ryder's heart hammered against his ribs. Your father believed you. Not at first. But I had evidence of Richard's character that couldn't be dismissed, and in the end I think father saw something in me that convinced him, a certainty he couldn't ignore. She smiled slightly. He said I reminded him of my mother when she decided to marry him against her family's wishes. So you're free of Blackwell. Completely, father has dissolved their business arrangements at some financial cost, but, she shrugged. Money can be rebuilt, reputations too. What matters is that I was finally able to choose my own path. And that path led back here. It wasn't quite a question, but Ryder needed to hear her confirm it. To you, she said simply. If you'll have me. The last of his doubts melted away like snow in sunshine. He drew her closer, one hand cradling her cheek. I've been lost without you, Zara. I thought I knew what loneliness was before, but it was nothing compared to these past months. I felt the same, her eyes glistened with unshed tears. Every day in Boston, I would look west and wonder what you were doing, if you were thinking of me. Every moment, he confessed. Then, before he could lose his courage, I love you. I think I have since I found you in those woods, though I was too stubborn to admit it even to myself. Her smile was like coming home after a long journey. And I love you, Ryder Gallagher, or whatever your real name might be. He laughed softly. It's Ryder Grayson, actually, but Gallagher is who I've become, and that man, he took a deep breath, that man would be honored if you would consider becoming his wife. For a heart-stopping moment, she was silent, her eyes searching his face. Then she reached up and traced the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. Yes, she whispered, 1,000 times yes. As their lips met in a first kiss that held the promise of a lifetime, snow continued to fall around them, not cold and isolating like Boston's winters, but magical and cleansing, marking the beginning of something new and beautiful. Inside, the music played on. Outside, two people who had once believed themselves destined for loneliness found that sometimes the heart finds its true home in the most unexpected wilderness. And sometimes, a lost girl in the woods isn't really lost at all. She's simply finding her way to where she truly belongs.